Welcome back to the Scotti-BYTE channel, and this is Scott. So today we want to talk about VLANs running on Ubuntu and Windows, and really talking about how they run on Ubuntu and Windows from the desktop, and more of a home lab situation. So TCP/IP is a broadcast-based protocol, and all that really means is that systems on a subnet hear communication from one another. For example, two systems plugged into a switch hear all the traffic from the other system, even though that traffic may not be meant for that other system. VLANs allow more than one network to run on a single cable. And what that means is if you have a particular computer, you can have one network adapter, and you can have multiple VLANs or multiple networks running over that single adapter and its single cable. And VLANs improve not only security through various router and firewall rules, but they also improve performance because they allow your traffic to be isolated. And most tutorials online discuss configuring VLANs in a managed network on a router and switches. For example, in a business environment, you might have a switch port set to a particular VLAN. The computer connected to it has no idea it's communicating on that VLAN. It simply is dedicated to that VLAN because that's what the network manager decided to do. And rather than discuss that, we're going to discuss what you can do from a particular system, which is more applicable to a home lab configuration. Get that right there. So this time we're going to learn how to configure VLANs on both Ubuntu and Windows desktops. So here's kind of a brief overview picture. I've got two networks here, a 172.16 network and a 192.168.80 network. And I have two computers connected to them. You notice that we don't have any routers pictured. We should have routers pictured because the routers are probably going to host things like the DHCP servers. In any event, let's just pretend that computer number one has an adapter called ETH0. It's a physical adapter, and we have two VLAN connections from it. One goes to this main LAN and the other goes to this VLAN down here, and the same thing for computer number two. So VLANs have dedicated address ranges and a VLAN tag to define them. As a good example, here 192.168.80.15 would be on my 80 VLAN. By convention, I usually like to make that third octet equivalent to the VLAN number because it makes things a little bit self-documenting. And so that might be an address on VLAN 80. So a VLAN from a NIC on a given computer may communicate as long as a managed switch port does not restrict that VLAN. So if this were going through a particular switch to connect to this VLAN down here, and that switch port said that this was VLAN 20, we wouldn't be able to connect to this main LAN. And if this computer were just to boot up under normal circumstances, it would be communicating on that other VLAN without knowledge that it was really on a particular VLAN. So in my examples, my managed router is providing a DHCP server to grant an address to a computer on either the main LAN or on a VLAN. So the router's not pictured, as I said, and if both these computers are connected to a switch without a router, another computer on the VLAN would have to offer a DHCP server, or the VLAN adapter on the computer would need to be statically addressed. Anyway, that's just kind of an overview of what we're going to look at here. So ETH0, for example, could be given 2, 3, or even 4 VLAN connections as long as the switch port that it was connected to was not restricting it to one particular VLAN. And the same thing is true of computer number 2. So we've talked about VLANs a lot in the gist of working with LXD containers and how we offer LXD containers out on the VLANs, but I've not really had much discussion about, in general, how we do this just from a physical computer or perhaps a VM that is either Ubuntu or Windows. So that's kind of what this video is about. Here we are at an Ubuntu desktop, and the first thing we're going to do is an ifconfig command from a terminal. And we have enp5s0, which has an address on the main LAN of 172.16.1.121. And of course, we also have the loopback adapter. The first thing I'd like to do is to be able to add a VLAN adapter to connect to one of the VLANs from this machine. And I'm going to do that, first of all, through the GUI. So if I come up in the upper right-hand corner and I go to Settings and I go to Network, in Network, you can see that we have our connection connected. If we go ahead and hit the gear and look at it, it doesn't seem very remarkable. It shows us the same IP address that we had through the ifconfig command. We can go here and look at other things. It has a name for that adapter, which it was configured originally through NetPlan, and it gives you the IPv4 settings and so on. We also have the ability to add a VPN connection, and we have the ability to add a wired connection. If we said add a wired connection, it would basically come up with another profile, and we would probably have to define which device that we were looking at. In this particular case, we don't have another device, and really what we want to add is a VLAN, but we don't see anything on this screen that indicates how to do that. In order to add a VLAN adapter, the way we have to do that is to use something called Network Manager, which should be a standard part of every network configuration for a desktop. If it is not, I will include that in the release notes. So we go down here and click on the Show Applications button, and I can type in nm. The name of the program is actually nm-connection-editor, and it brings up this icon for advanced network configuration. And when it comes up, it says network connections. So we have an option to add a network connection. If we press the plus sign in the bottom of the network connections screen, you'll see it says choose a connection type. And if we click down here, we have choices of virtual connections, and one of the connection choices we have is VLAN. So if we connect VLAN and say create a VLAN, it will ask us for the VLAN ID. In my particular case, on my network, I already have a VLAN ID of 80, and so I want to connect to that particular VLAN, and I want to give it an interface name. This can be whatever I want it to be. I'll just say VLAN 80. And then it wants to know what your parent interface is. And my parent interface clearly is ENP5S0. And so I can choose either one of these here because they're really the same. So I choose ENP5S0, and then I go ahead and do a save. It will prompt me for my password. That is prompting for the sudo password, and it now says that I have VLAN connection 1. Since it just calls it VLAN connection 1, I'm going to go ahead and highlight it and hit the gear here. And when it comes up and says VLAN connection 1, I'll go ahead and name this thing here VLAN 80, just so that when I'm in the network editor, network connection editor, I can see that one is VLAN 80. Now if we come back here to the terminal and we do another ifconfig command, we'll just stretch this screen up a little bit here or down a little bit if we have any luck. And you can see that we now have an EMP5S0 that we had before, but we now have a VLAN 80 connection named VLAN 80, and it got an address of 192.168.80.76, and it got that from my router's DHCP server. I also have the option to come back over here to the network connection screen, say add me another connection, go down here, choose VLAN again, and this time I'll choose create, and then under here I will go ahead and choose VLAN 30 because I also have a VLAN 30 connection. This time from the beginning I'll go ahead and say VLAN 30 up here. I can make this name anything that I really want to make it, and my parent interface once again is still going to be EMP5S0. And so then I can go ahead and do another save, and now I have a VLAN 30 here. If I go back to my terminal and do another if config, you can see that I have a VLAN 30, and that's because this time I didn't actually go out and name the VLAN, and we can see that here if we go into the gear, and it says no interface name, and I did not put an interface name down here. So consequently, by default, if you don't provide an interface name, it goes ahead and names it the parent interface name with a dot and then the VLAN number, which is self-documenting and not really a bad thing, but I just wanted to point out how that would show up. Suppose we wanted to delete these interfaces, I could highlight VLAN 80, I could hit the minus sign and say delete that connection. Once again, it asks for my sudo password. I can highlight VLAN 30, likewise hit the minus sign, say delete on it, and it will be gone as well. If we go back to the terminal, clear the screen, and do an if config, we're back to just EMP5S0, and both VLAN connections have been deleted. In addition to configuring our VLANs from the GUI in the Network Connection Manager editor, we can also configure our VLANs from the NetPlan program. And in order to do that, we want to do a cd/etc/netplan. And over here, if we do an ls, I have a NetPlan file by default, and I'll just go ahead and cat this file out so that you can see the contents. This particular system is actually a LXD virtual machine, but it really doesn't matter because really all Ubuntu machines would be comparable, and it simply says the network renderer is network manager, and it doesn't have any other details in it, but we're going to go ahead and change that. Just as a reminder, if I do an if config, EMP5S0 has an address on the main LAN of 172.16.1.121, and so we're going to go ahead and edit this file here. That is the 00-default-nm-renderer.yaml. Again, your file name may differ. We're going to go ahead and delete these two lines that were in the file originally, and what we're going to do is replace those with kind of a very simple file, and we're simply going to say network Ethernets are EMP5S0, and DHCP is set to yes. VLANs are VLAN 80, ID equals 80. Link is EMP5S0, and DHCP4 is set to yes. I do a Control O to write the file out, hit enter, and Control X to exit the nano editor. And then I'm going to do a sudo netplan apply. If I can spell, sudo netplan apply. And we get our prompt back right away. And if I do an if config, we now have VLAN 80 here, which has an address of 192.168.80.76. And just like the example in the GUI, if I go back here again and edit the file, I can go ahead and make a copy of this particular section. And then I'll go ahead and paste it down here at the bottom of the file. I'll go ahead and add this one as VLAN 30 will be the name of the adapter, and it's VLAN 30, and it also goes to ENP5S0. DHCP4 is equal to yes. I do a Control O and enter to write the file out, a Control X to exit the editor, and a sudo netplan apply. And then we do an if config, and we now have a VLAN 30 as well as a VLAN 80, and the VLAN 30 is got the address 192.168.30.61. It got that from the DHCP server on my router because I have VLAN 30 set up there. To reverse the process and to remove VLAN 30 and VLAN 80, I can do a sudo IP link set device VLAN 80 down, which goes ahead and stops that network interface. And then if I want to delete that network interface, I can do a sudo IP link delete VLAN 80. And likewise, I can do the same thing with VLAN 30, bring it down, and then also delete the link for VLAN 30. Now, if I do an if config, all those settings are back to the original where we have only ENP5S0. Here we are over on the Windows desktop, and I'm going to go ahead and right click on the start button, and I'll go ahead and say terminal with an admin interface here. And so our admin Windows PowerShell pops up, and I'll go ahead and make this screen a little bit larger, and then I'm going to do an IP config. In an IP config, you can see that right now we simply have something called the Ethernet adapter Ethernet instance device 0, and it has an address on the main LAN of 172.16.1.214. From here, we want to go to Device Manager. The easiest way to do that is to right click on your Start button, go up and choose Run, and then type in devmgmt.msc to bring up Device Manager. Once it brings up the Device Manager screen, you can go to your network adapters and expand them. In this particular case, I have a Red Hat VirtIO adapter because I happen to be in a virtual machine, and you may have a physical adapter. Go ahead and right click on that and go to Properties. When you go to Properties, you can go to the Advanced section. In the Advanced section, we want to go ahead and scroll down in the Properties window to where it says VLAN ID. We click on VLAN ID. By default, it will be using 0, which is the untagged VLAN. And we're going to go ahead and type in 80 so we can connect to VLAN 80. I go ahead and do an OK here, and then I can go ahead and exit the Device Manager. If I do an IP config again, you'll see that it does not have an address right now. I don't want to restart right now. Gotta love Windows. And so we're going to do an IP config /renew. And the IP config /renew should give us a new address on the interface. And sure enough, it gives us 192.168.80.173. So what we did in this case is we changed our Ethernet adapter from being connected to the main LAN to being connected to a VLAN 80. So I want to go ahead and revert this back because that's not actually what I wanted. So I'm going to go ahead and right click here, go up to Run. launch our device manager again, open our network adapters, click on my network adapter, right click on that and say properties, go over to advanced and go down to VLAN again, choose VLAN ID, and this time we'll set it to 0. Click on the OK button, and I can dismiss my device manager. And again, if I do an ipconfig/renew, it will go back and change that IP address to the main LAN, which was 172.16.1.214. Unfortunately, if our goal is to create separate VLAN adapters like we did over in Ubuntu, Windows requires the Hyper-V switch manager to accomplish that. And in order to run Hyper-V, we need to have the Hyper-V ability to run Hyper-V, and Hyper-V requires Windows Professional pretty much, or a couple of the other Windows Enterprise versions. So anyway, assuming that you have that, if you click on the Start button and go ahead and say Features, we're going to say Turn Windows Features on or off, and then go down and put a check mark in Hyper-V. And let's see, is there anything else that we need here? Somehow I'm thinking there's something else. I think that probably is it. And I'll go ahead and do an OK. It'll go ahead and say searching for required files, applying changes to this Windows, and you have to restart. So I go ahead and do a restart now. Now that Windows has been restarted and Hyper-V is added as a feature, I'm going to go ahead and do a right click on the Start button, go ahead and start an admin version of the terminal, which in this case brings up Windows PowerShell. If it doesn't bring up Windows PowerShell, you're going to want an administrator's version of Windows PowerShell on your machine. So now that we have PowerShell up and running, first thing I'm going to do is an ipconfig rather, and you can see here that we have a Ethernet adapter, but what we've added is we've added a virtual Ethernet adapter down here as well. And that's not particularly helpful for us, so we're going to have to make a couple of changes. First thing that we're going to do is we're going to do a get network adapter, and that's going to tell us what the name of our network adapter is here. And you can see that it is simply called Ethernet Instance 0, and it has a description of Red Hat VirtIO Ethernet adapter just because that's what it is in this virtual machine. The next thing I want to do is I want to create a new virtual switch. So I use this command new VM switch -name VLAN -vSwitch -net adapter name, and this is where you need to put the net adapter name that we got back from the get net adapter command, and then -allow management OS to be $true. We hit enter on that command and it will complete that. The next thing we want to do is, as a side effect, it created that virtual switch that you saw up here, this Ethernet adapter virtual switch, but we don't really particularly need that. So we're going to go ahead and do a remove VM network adapter -management OS -name VLAN -vSwitch, and that will go ahead and remove that VLAN vSwitch adapter that we have above that we don't really need. At this point I can do an ipconfig and we just have our one adapter back, which is really what we wanted. So just like we did in Ubuntu, let's go ahead and create a new virtual adapter, and we're going to do that with the command add -VM network adapter -management OS dash name, and we're going to name our new adapter VLAN 80, dash switch name is VLAN dash vSwitch, and then dash pass through, and we pipe that over to set dash VM network adapter VLAN dash access dash VLAN ID equals 80. And it completes that command. And if we do an IP config, we will see that we have a 172. That's the other switch. We see we have a 192.168.80.120, which shows you that this adapter is in fact on the 80 VLAN. Now likewise, we can go back up and we can create one for VLAN 30 like we did over in Ubuntu, and we'll name it VLAN 30. We hit enter and it comes back, and if we do an IP config, we now have, so I realized that I needed to do an IP config / renew after I did that last command, and what I ended up with now is a Ethernet adapter called VLAN 80, which we had at 192.168.80.120, another VLAN adapter at 192.168.30.36, which is on VLAN 30. Presumably, if I want to add another one for my main LAN, I could do an add VM network adapter, again, dash management OS dash name equals main LAN, and the switch name again is still VLAN dash vSwitch, and I have a pass-through which I pipe over to set dash VM network adapter VLAN dash access is VLAN 0. And when I do that, I should do an IP config / renew after doing that command. And I should now have 3 adapters and the virtual switch. And so I'm expecting an address on 172.16.1. something. And if I look down through here, sure enough, I have a 172.16.1.192, and that one's called main LAN, and I have my VLAN 30, and I have my VLAN 80 down here someplace. Yeah, there it is. It's the first one, which is 192.168.80.120, and then I have my virtual Ethernet switch here that Hyper-V virtual switch manager is running. At this point, if I wanted to remove my network adapters, I should be able to do a remove -VM network adapter -management OS -name VLAN 30, and that will go ahead and remove VLAN 30 and likewise VLAN 80. And then once I do that, I should be able to do an IP config. And now we see that we only have our main LAN adapter there, and it points back to the main LAN. So in summary, it's very easy to configure more than one VLAN on a single network adapter. We showed how to use the GUI Network Manager NM Connection Editor in Ubuntu to add a VLAN connection. And we learned how to use NetPlan from the Ubuntu CLI to add a VLAN as well. We learned how to change a Windows Ethernet adapter in the GUI to use a VLAN. And finally, we also learned how to add a VLAN in Windows PowerShell. Anyway, that's it for today. Please subscribe and like to the channel, and don't forget to hit that notification bell, and we'll see you next time.